What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here with Darium's Competitive Pokemon. Got a little bit of a fun Peck deck to show off here for this deck profile for standard format. This thing is a blast to play. This thing is a lot of fun. This is a crazy Gourgeist deck. Going to be utilizing that Pumpkin Bomb attack to just do huge damage, pump out huge one-hit knockouts. Pumpkin Bomb does 10 plus 40 more damage for the amount of tool cards attached to all your Pokemon, and then you discard all the tool cards after you do it. So with 6 Pokemon tool cards in play, 6 times 4 is 24. So you do 240 damage plus 10, 250 damage. Now you cannot use Choice Band. You discard the tools and then you do the damage. So Choice Band does not boost your damage output, so you're stuck there at 250. But thankfully, 250 damage, just about enough to knock out anything in standard format. Pretty much anything except for a Solgaleo. You're going to have a little bit of hard time knocking out a Solgaleo. However, you're going to be knocking out pretty much everything else pretty easily, so long as you can get the tools you need in play and the double colorless and all of that. So this deck is nuts. It doesn't, sometimes it blows up in your face and doesn't really do everything that it's supposed to do. But when it works, and you pumpkin bomb, and you win the game. It reminds me a lot of kind of early Night March decks. I mean, not only because you're playing Pumpkaboo, which is super cute, and I love Pumpkaboo. Even got a Pumpkaboo tattoo. I love Pumpkaboo so much. So, it does remind me of Night March in that, you have this double colorless energy attacker who is just firing away, at your opponent. However, it's just not nearly as stable as Night March was. You need to constantly be drawing into more tools in order to attach them to your Pokemon. And then if you run out of tools, you lose the game. But there are some cool things going on with this list. I have done pretty well with it. I've put some effort into this list, actually. This list was originally developed by my good friend, Andrew Wambolt. He shared the list with me. We tweaked it together for a little while. We decided that it probably doesn't have what it takes to be a regional championship winning list. So, it's not exactly on our competitive plate anymore. But that being said, it is definitely a lot of fun to play. And I think it does have potential as a deck. So I think it does have potential to be at least okay, but we're not exactly sure where it stands as far as its competitive viability, just because it is hot and cold. When it's hot, but when it's cold, it is definitely cold. So if you want to have some fun at your league, or if you're looking for just a new deck that only plays like 1 copy of Tapu Lele, then you could definitely give this thing a try. Let's take a look at it anyways. Gonna roll some games on PTCGO with this thing in the days and weeks to come, just to show you guys how it works. But I think it is very unique at the very least, and if you were trying to build a deck out of Gourgeist, I think this is probably the best way to do it. We got 4 copies of Gourgeist and 4 copies of Pumpkaboo. We need a lot of draw in this deck to draw all of our tools, so we play a 2/2 Octillery line and 1 copy of Oranguru. We also play 1 copy of Alolan Vulpix, 3 copies of Klefki, and 1 copy of Tapu Lele GX. So let's take a look at these guys. Obviously, our main attacker is Gourgeist. We play 4 of them because we need to take our big one-hit knockouts with Gourgeist. That's what this whole deck is about, attacking with Gourgeist. So you're going to be trying to set up as many Gourgeist as you can, probably just 3, and then you're going to try and just do 3 huge Pumpkin Bomb attacks back to back on some Pokemon GX and just win the game very quickly. Now, when this deck does win games, you will usually win them like 6 prizes to 3 or 6 prizes to 4. You will just go up a lot on your opponent if your deck is firing on all 6 cylinders, doing exactly what it needs to do. That being said, sometimes whiffing just 1 tool can make or break the difference between a win and a loss. So we do need to make sure that we play lots of draw Pokemon in here to keep our board going, to keep those tools flowing. Right, so you can see we do play the 2/2 Octillery line. I had tried out a 3/2 Octillery line. I tried out a 3/3 Octillery line. Andrew Wambolt's original list played a 2/2 Octillery line and 2 copies of Oranguru. Now, there aren't exactly a lot of bench space. There isn't exactly a lot of bench space for, 2 copies of Octillery and 2 copies of Oranguru, I found that ideally what you want is you want to get 2 copies of Octillery into play. However, if you prize one, 1 copy of Octillery, 1 Oranguru will suffice. So this is a pretty good count as far as, getting your board position established. Usually with 2 copies of Octillery out, you're going to be able to Abyssal Hand and fill your hand to make sure that you're constantly drawing into the tools that you need in order to Pumpkin Bomb for enough damage. So Oranguru, he helps out in a pinch too. Sometimes you open a dead hand, you need to just instruct a little bit to be able to, draw into a supporter to get moving. Now, the Alolan Vulpix, this was my inclusion, wasn't originally in Andrew Wambolt's list, but that's because we started to think that maybe Brooklet Hill would be really good in here. Originally, we were playing a few copies of Field Blower to counter Parallel City. Parallel City can be absolutely devastating for this deck. If you can only have 4 Pokemon in play, that means you can only do 4 times 4 16, 160, 170 damage. So that means that you can't do enough damage to knock out big Pokemon GX like Gardevoir GX or Zoroark GX or Golisopod GX. So if you get Parallel City, you're going to be out of luck. So you need something to counter Parallel City. Field Blower is what we were playing at first, but I think that I decided that Brooklet Hill would be better since you can Brooklet Hill for your Remoraid's to get going early. You can also Brooklet Hill for an Alolan Vulpix, and then since we do play 4 copies of Floatstone, it's very easy to get that Alolan Vulpix into the active position on the first turn of the game. And Beacon can really help you set up your Octilleries, your Gourgeist, could grab your Tapu Lele GX if you need to in a pinch. You can also grab some Klefkis if you want to go for a turn 2 power play. Grab a couple Klefkis, Wonderlock them both on. They count as tools. These Klefkis can actually be used as tools. That's why we played them here. There's really cool synergy with the Klefki and the Gourgeist, and I think that was really creative on Andrew Wambolt's part. Now, a big problem in standard format is that there's no way to recover these tools. If only Eco Arm was legal, we would have a much easier time making this deck work. But unfortunately, Eco Arm is not legal in standard format, so there's no real super reasonable way to recover tools, but there is a way to recover Klefki. And Klefki's Wonderlock ability means that you can Wonderlock and use Klefki as a tool. So with Rescue Stretcher and Klefki, we do have some ways to recover tools back into the deck if we happen to run out of our 16 tools that we do play in this deck. So that is a cool little option to have with the Klefkis. I do like that. With the 3 Klefki, we have 19 tools total in this deck, meaning that basically a third of this deck is tools. So you will open some very weird hands sometimes, which is a whole lot of tools in them. And it can be really ugly if you have to Sycamore them. But that is the nature of playing this very hot and cold deck, as I have said. 1 copy of Tapu Lele GX is fine, obviously just to help this thing get started with a turn 1 Bridget, if you can find it, or just a turn 1 supporter for that matter, just to help get this deck going. We don't play a lot of draw supporters in here. What you want to do is just set up some Octilleries and use those to draw. But the 1 copy of Tapu Lele GX is needed in here. You don't really want to play more than 1. There's not a lot of bench space for it with Octillery and Oranguru. Also, you don't really want that liability on your bench. The ideal board setup with this deck is just to have some Gourgeist in play and a couple Octilleries and some bench space so that you can Wonderlock your Klefkis and then put something else down, draw into another tool, and finish things off with your Gourgeist. So, Tapu Lele GX can be used for this energy drive. I will sometimes against Gardevoir GX go into a turn 1 Tapu Lele if I have the DCE and Energy Drive Vulpix or something like that. And then, by the time that they beacon, then I can Energy Drive it for knockout just to get a cheap little knockout on the Vulpix. I don't really mind if the Tapu Lele goes down, because if the Tapu Lele goes down, I usually have a Gourgeist that's able to knock out a Gardevoir GX, if it were to come up and knock out my Tapu Lele, so I could trade pretty favorably from there. So that's it for the Pokemon. Let's move on to the supporters. I mentioned that there are not a lot of them. There are 4 copies of Professor Sycamore, 2 copies of N, 1 copy of Bridget, and 2 copies of Guzma. Now this is a little bit sketchy, but like I said, we included the copies of Brooklet Hill in here to get this deck jump started. I was not exactly excited about the amount of draw that this deck had without Brooklet Hill, and I think Brooklet Hill just makes the deck that much more consistent. You could Brooklet Hill turn 1 for a Vulpix and use your Vulpix to bail you out by getting cards like Octillery, by getting cards like Oranguru, by getting cards like Tapu Lele. So Brooklet Hill does that dual function of not only countering Parallel City, it replenishes your bench after a Parallel City as well, because you could just go and search a Pokemon for your bench as soon as you play the stadium, and that helps replenish your bench. But it also just boosts the consistency of your deck by allowing you to set up these water-type Pokemon, Alolan Vulpix, and Octillery that help you to draw through your deck. So the supporter line, very thin. 2 copies of N is fine. 4 copies of Sycamore. You need Sycamore. As much as Sycamore hurts in this deck to play because it makes you discard your tools sometimes, you need Sycamore because this deck just needs a lot of cards all the time in order to work. One Bridget sketches me out, but there really is just not a lot of space in this deck. I promise you, there's really not. This deck is about as tight as it gets as far as space goes. So one Bridget is a little bit of a consolation. I would definitely like a second. I just don't know quite where to put it right now. This deck does play a lot of items. We have 4 copies of Ultra Ball, 4 copies of Rescue Stretcher, 4 copies of Dashing Pouch, 4 copies of Choice Band, 4 copies of Bodybuilding Dumbbells, and 4 copies of Floatstone, as well as 3 copies of Brooklet Hill. That is a lot of tool cards. But like I said, I got a 1 Korean Floatstone in here. Don't mind that. But like I said, you need tool cards. That's what this whole deck functions on. Damage output by tool cards. Now, Choice Band, a little bit of a weird inclusion in here since it doesn't actually work with your Pumpkaboo, but you can slap it on Tapu Lele GX to do a little bit more damage if you need to. So it's here for that. Dashing Pouch is actually a really cool tool in this deck. It says, if the Pokemon that this card is attached to discards energy for its retreat cost, put that energy into your hand instead of the discard pile. I do like Dashing Pouch in this deck because sometimes, like I said, you'll have to retreat your Pokemon with DCU, or you'll have the Tapu Lele active and you'll be energy driving something, and then you can put Dashing Pouch, retreat the Tapu Lele, take the DCE back to your hand, retreat into a Pumpkaboo, put the DCE right back down, and then use Pumpkin Bomb, for, this is called Pumpkin Bomb, right? Yeah, Pumpkin Bomb for a big one-hit knockout. So Dashing Pouch does get some mileage here. I've used it a couple times. I definitely have saved a couple DCE using it. So Dashing Pouch is really cool in here. Bodybuilding Dumbbells can save you in a pinch or two, gives your stage 1 Pokemon plus 40 hit points. A lot of times your tool cards will not be staying on your Pokemon since you're discarding them, but if you happen to miss an attack and you got the Bodybuilding Dumbbells, it's going to make your Pumpkaboos a little bit harder to knock out. So it's a good one to include. And then Floatstone is definitely the best tool card in this deck, just giving your Pokemon free retreat, allowing you to get into that turn 1 Alolan Vulpix very easily. And it's very easy to go turn 1 Brooklet Hill, Alolan Vulpix, and then go ahead Beacon for 2 Octillery, and then just turbo draw from there. Really cool little strategy that I do like here as far as just, it allows you to draw the cards that you need in order to take those big knockouts. So that is pretty cool. I could actually see like maybe a Mallow in here or something. Sometimes it is very hard to hit your double colorless energy, especially if you prize 1 or 2. So maybe a Mallow could be good with the amount of Octilleries that you play, just to stack your deck and then make sure that you can draw the cards that you need in order to take a clutch knockout or something. 3 copies of Brooklet Hill. Like I've said, I've been talking about these the whole time. They are great for setting up Octillery, getting that Alolan Vulpix to get you kind of jump started, and also for countering Parallel City. We aren't playing any copies of Field Blower in here right now. You could switch the Brooklet Hills for Field Blower, but the deck is just more consistent with Brooklet Hill. You're kind of just taking a loss to Garbodor right now with this deck. I mean, you got no chance of beating it. This deck needs to be playing against big Pokemon GX so that you just knock out 3 of them, win the game that way. That is definitely the best way, the best matchups for this deck. 4 copies of Rescue Stretcher, really good for getting your pumpkins back into play, really good for recovering after Parallel City, also really good for throwing the Klefkis back in, since a lot of times, that will be how you end up finishing the game off, is with those Klefkis after you've expired a lot of your tools by discarding them, using them for Pumpkin Bomb, things like that. Rescue Stretcher keeps the Klefkis in your deck so you always have a little bit of juice left in order to finish off the game. So Rescue Stretcher, very valuable in here. 4 copies is definitely needed. And then 4 copies of Ultra Ball, obviously for consistency, setting your Pokemon up. A lot of times, Ultra Ball are very difficult to play in this deck. You don't ever want to discard almost any of your resources. So Ultra Ball, very tough to play in this deck. But a lot of times, you will find you just have to make a constellation somewhere in order to get set up and get going. So definitely a love-hate relationship with Ultra Ball in this deck, but unfortunately, there aren't just a lot of options for Pokemon Search for a deck like this right now. And then to finish things off, we've got our 4 copies of Double Colorless Energy. Oh, where am I? Okay. We also have 2 copies of Special Charge. So I forgot about that. 4 copies of Double Colorless Energy and 2 copies of Special Charge. I actually missed those. They were right here. So we do have some ways to recover our Double Colorless Energy as well. The Special Charge are definitely needed to get the most amount of mileage possible out of these Double Colorless Energies. You don't need any basic energies in this deck. The only attacks you're going to be using are, I guess, Energy Drive, Pumpkin Bomb, and maybe Powder Snow on Alolan Vulpix. Nothing else. So 4 copies of Double Colorless Energy and 2 copies of Special Charge to make sure that your deck just stays juiced with Double Colorless Energy enough to finish off the game. And that's it for our crazy Pumpkaboo deck, Pumpkin Bomb, the deck. Let me know what you guys think of this deck. If you try it out on PTCGO, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Let me know if you think Pumpkaboo has got any potential to be an actual competitive deck or not, or if you think it's just going to be a side project here. Anyways, wanted to show off this list that I've been experimenting with here in some testing games. It has won some good games and it has lost some hard games too. So definitely, it's at the very least is an interesting deck, and I wanted to show you guys what I was working on. So thank you all for watching the video. Let me know what you guys think of this deck in the comments below. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Peace.